Hello everyone, and welcome back. In the previous episode, we reviewed Mazu as a planet. Today we will take a dive into the water world and explore its earliest multicellular life forms. As mentioned in the season pilot, due to an ice age that occurred early in Mazu's history, photosynthetic life forms did not appear until 668 million years into the timeline. This puts Mazu far behind Nusku in organism complexity. That will be reflected in the amount of time it takes for multicellular life to appear on Mazu. Unlike on Nusku, where multicellularity evolved multiple times, Mazu will only evolve multicellularity a single time. And here it is. Protosalm is the first clade of multicellular life on Mazu. Something to note going forward is that on Nusku, all the clades were named using similar naming conventions to the ones used on Earth. In order to continue having original names on Mazu, we will change this naming convention. The clades of Mazu will be named using words and roots from many different languages, in addition to the Greek and Latin ones that we already know. Therefore, Protosalm comes from the Greek prefix proto, meaning first, and the Korean word salm, meaning life or incarnation. This clade will be extremely simple, sporting only a single mouth with a basic gut, where both food is taken in and waste expelled. This mouth will also be where its gametes are expelled from for reproduction. They will use the same broadcast spawning method of reproduction that many creatures used on Nusku. They will expel huge numbers of gametes into their environment with the hopes that some unite with gametes from other individuals to create new offspring. Something to note is that unlike on Nusku, multicellular creatures on Mazu will be either male or female. Its nervous system will be concentrated around the mouth, so that it can be near the chemoreceptors found in that area. This organism will not have much ability to move itself. Its only form of locomotion will be its hair-like extremities found along the sides of the organism. Beating these hairs up and down will allow for extremely small and jittery movements. These short bursts of movement will not make this clade independent of the current, which will mean that the protosalm are planktonic. This first clade of multicellular life will evolve on Nusku 2.248 billion years into the timeline. Early on, this initial clade may split into two subclades, members having their mouths facing upwards, and members having their mouths facing downwards. We will call the upwards facing clade sursum salm, and the downwards facing clade diorsum salm. Sursum and diorsum both come from Latin, and salm comes from the Korean word for life, as mentioned earlier. These two subclades will quickly start to diversify. Perhaps a member of the diorsum salm clade evolves into this creature, which we will name Halea paleus. They evolve to open their mouths extremely wide to take in as much water as possible. Eventually, these creatures would evolve to use their large mouths as a form of propulsion, essentially becoming a tiny alien jellyfish. This will mean that their stomachs and reproductive parts will be exposed. This is fine, however, as the creature can simply evolve a rough, sticky surface to catch their microscopic prey directly onto the surface of their now external stomach. They will continue to reproduce in the same way, expelling large amounts of gametes with the hopes that they will find other gametes to form new individuals. Due to their similarity to jellyfish on Earth, Halea comes from the Filipino word for jelly. Paleus comes from the Latin word for hat. Halea paleus will appear on Mazu 2.25 billion years into the timeline. Maybe a different lineage of the diorsum salm evolves to live at the bottom of the ocean instead of floating near the surface. The resulting clade we will name polstimorph, coming from the Russian verb polsti, meaning to crawl or to creep, and the Greek root for shape or form. Polstimorphs will adapt their hairs once used for swimming into a sort of leg-like structure that can be used to slowly crawl across the seafloor, sucking up all the microorganisms in their path. The only trouble that they may face is in reproduction. You see, these creatures' gametangia, or parts used for reproduction, are located inside the mouth. In their ancestors, this was fine, because once gametes were released, they would simply be expelled from the mouth and taken away by the current. However, this new clade spends almost all of its time with its mouth facing the ground, so in order to increase gamete dispersion, the gametangia may move out of the mouth and more to one of the sides of the creature. Speaking of sides, this creature really doesn't have a front side or a back side. They can move omnidirectional and really don't have a forwards or backwards. Pulstimorphs will begin to appear on the ocean floor 2.25 billion years into the timeline. The Surumsalm will also gain a seabed-dwelling representative. They have an upwards-facing mouth, so instead of feeding on the nutrients that has already settled on the seabed, this new clade will feed on the nutrients falling from the surface. They will adapt their hairs, once used to swim, into sticky feeding arms that help catch food as it falls from the surface. Their body will make a cup shape to help catch marine snow in order to make sure that their gametes don't get stuck in their food-catching extremities. Their gametangia may grow into a sort of stalk that rises above the hair-like structures that they use to catch their food. The gametes, when released at the top of the stalk, will have the best chance of not getting caught by the feeding hairs of the parent. Their similarity to a satellite dish will earn them the name Wisong Kalos, coming from the Korean word for satellite and Greek for stem. They will start to appear on the seabeds of Mazu 2.251 billion years into the timeline. The Caudahuzi are a clade descended from pulsimorphs. They will continue to take advantage of the large mat of microscopic organisms that has been falling from the surface for several 100 million years before the arrival of multicellular organisms. However, instead of feeding directly on the surface, this branch may select for a lifestyle of digging beneath the surface to access organic material that would otherwise be inaccessible to the basal pulsimorphs. It may take several million years for them to gain the adaptations necessary for digging, not appearing until 2.26 billion years into the timeline. Early members of this clade will at first be more round and bulbous like their relatives. However, as they move towards specialization for digging, they may become longer and more similar to worms on Earth. They may move their hairs that were once used for walking along the seabed away from their mouths, dispersing them all along their body to aid in pulling this group through their tunnels. This clade will be spending most of their time beneath the seabed. However, if they don't come out of their tunnels every once in a while, the oxygen in their tunnel will run out and they will asphyxiate and die. Therefore, Caudahuzi may increase the surface area of their tail in order to increase oxygen uptake and improve the amount of time that they can spend feeding in their burrow. They may develop some feathered structures to aid in the absorbing of oxygen. The shape of these feathered structures is what gives this clade its name. Cauda is the Greek word for tail, and huzi is traditional Chinese for mustache. It is important to note that although this clade's mustache may serve the function of a gill, they have no blood. They are still small enough so that oxygen can passively diffuse throughout their body. Back on the surface, a descendant of the Halopaleus clade has evolved to live in a mutualistic relationship with a clade of photosynthetic bacteria. The Halopaleus provides protection and nutrients for the bacteria, and in exchange, the bacteria provides the Halopaleus with a source of energy that it acquires from photosynthesis. This relationship is similar to one seen on Earth. On Earth, Cassiopeia jellyfish have an almost identical situation. They have algae living within their tentacles. The algae give the Cassiopeia food, and the Cassiopeia give the algae protection and a guarantee to the axis of sunlight. Remember, Mazu is further from its star Roseus than Nusku. Although not by much, this still means that Mazu receives less light than its neighbor, and Mazu's photosynthetic life will have to be properly equipped to deal with this difference in light level. So contrary to Nusku, which evolved purple photosynthesizers, Mazu evolved to have photosynthesizers that use a black pigment, allowing them to absorb as much light as possible. So the tops of this clade will appear to have black pockets where the bacteria reside. Each organism is technically made up of two completely different species of organism, but for the sake of simplicity, we will refer to them as a single clade in the cladogram. Platynochae will appear 2.261 billion years into the timeline and find immediate success all across the planet. Their shape and the color of their photosynthetic companions is what earns them the name. Platynochae comes from the Greek word for flat and the Spanish word for night. They will almost immediately evolve into many different forms, competing for access to light and to access to the limited nutrient resources in the ocean. They will become larger, so large in fact that the energy required to move will be far greater than the energy produced by their photosynthetic companions. So, they will stop their jellyfish-like movement in favor of remaining still and being completely at the will of the current. In order to stay near the surface, they may have gained some gas reserves similar to swim bladders found in fish on Earth. In addition, they may use the hairs found on the perimeter of their body to grab and hold onto other members of their species. This has the benefit of making a group of Platynochae harder to break up and sink by the frequent and intense storms found on Mazu. In addition, it allows their broadcast spawning to be more effective, as other members of their species are close together. Eventually, these groups of Platynochae will form a sort of floating reef, attracting biodiversity from all over Mazu. Early on, however, there may only be one clade that calls this reef home. Sagarumorph is a descendant of the Pulsimorph. It has evolved a suction mechanism on its hair-like legs to help cling to the Platynochae. It is very similar to the mechanism found in starfish on Earth. Their bodies will flatten out significantly so as to not get blown off of their new home by the current. Saguromorphs will spend their entire life attached to a Platynochae reef, feeding on microscopic organisms and other debris found on the surface of the reef. They may also feed off the gametes that the Platynochae release when they reproduce. Although this may sound like a pretty negative relationship for the reef, they actually do get some benefits. When the Saguromorphs excrete waste, the Platynochae can use the nutrients to feed their photosynthetic companion. In addition, at the end of their life, the Saguromorph will likely end up becoming food for the reef. Their name comes from the Japanese word for hang, due to their ability to hang onto their habitat, and the Greek root for form or shape. They will appear on Mazu 2.261 billion years into the timeline. Naming and documenting every creature Mazu has to offer would completely halt the progress of this already slow project. So the clades outlined today should be taken as just that, an outline for an extremely complex and diverse planet with far more clades than you can see here. I have only covered the largest clades that will have the most significant impact on the future of this planet. Next time, we will explore how the evolution of predators affects the Mazuan seas, as well as how the Platynochae reefs become one of the most important ecosystems on the planet. Thank you all for watching.